Good morning, everyone. Bruno Rodriguez here, incident meteorologist, joined by Jasmine, our interpreter for today. So we are getting to be near the tail end of this critical fire weather pattern, but we're not completely in the clear just yet. So I'll briefly touch on what we saw out there last night. We did get a little bit of a taste of what we're going to be seeing during the middle part of this week. So we actually saw fairly moderated humidity recoveries for the first time in a couple of nights. Especially up north, we had a little bit of a system clip us just north of us. That brought a little bit of moisture in, especially to northern areas. Humidity recoveries generally 50 to 60 for a lot of the upper elevations, especially from Elk Mountain northward into the north zone of the fire as well. A little bit poorer down south over near Pecos, generally 30 to 40% there, but still a pretty considerable difference compared to the teens and 20s that we've been seeing out there. It is a little bit of a temporary relief, though, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. It was also very windy out there last night, especially up on the higher terrain. So one example, Elk Mountain, again, they sit around 11,500 feet. They gusted up to 71 miles per hour last night. And that's really a function of the jet stream, that core of strong winds being directly over us. And you can kind of see that on the satellite this morning. So this image here is showing essentially water vapor in the middle portion of the atmosphere. But what it does show really well, you'll see these kind of like wave undulations over northeastern New Mexico. That's basically those mountain waves that we've been talking about, those kind of strong winds that oscillate up and down as they cross over mountain ranges. So visible really well on satellite. That's what's been helping to generate those strong winds over the ridge tops. Heading into today, though, despite those good recoveries last night, we are still on track for critical fire weather day. So red flag warning in effect today. It's the last one. We've had 3 successive days, and thankfully that pattern is going to be changing. But for today, still looking at west winds primarily over the fire area and strong winds, especially for higher elevations. So what we're seeing out there, and it's going to be especially noticeable today, is a lot of variability depending on your exposure and your elevation. So, one example was a 71 mile an hour gust last night at Elk Mountain. Most areas in the sheltered Pecos Valley, for example, only seeing gusts of 30, maybe 35 miles an hour. And we're going to see more of that today. Gusts mostly for the higher terrain in that 40 to 55 mile an hour range. I know that's a big range, but it's big country out there. Lower elevations looking closer to 30, 35 mile an hour gusts. Humidity, again, despite those recoveries last night coming down really effectively today, we're already sitting in the low teens out there and expecting some single-digit humidity as well. So especially on the eastern portions of the fire, east of the ridge tops, and that just is a result of downslope winds. And I'm going to go into a little bit of an explainer on why that is. It's very typical to see drier conditions when you have downsloping winds. So if you think of a little sphere of air, or an air parcel is what we call it. So it's just an enclosed sphere, and it's at the top of a mountain range. You then force that downslope with those downslope winds, and as it descends towards the surface, it's getting into a different environment when it comes to the surrounding atmospheric pressure. So when we think of atmospheric pressure, it's highest at the surface, right? Because pressure in the atmosphere is just a function of the weight of the air above it. So at the surface, you have the weight of the entire column of air through the atmosphere. But as you go up in elevation, you have decreasing weight, or a decreasing amount of air above you, and therefore lower pressure. So stands to reason, as you force that parcel down towards the surface, you have increasing pressure on the outside of that parcel, and that helps it to shrink, right? You're compressing that air parcel. So this kind of touches on the ideal gas theory. If you remember from high school physics, you're looking at the relationship between volume, temperature, and pressure. So as you decrease the volume of the parcel, you're increasing the energy inside it, right? You're making those molecules collide faster and increasing the temperature. And with increasing temperature comes lower humidity. So with downsloping winds, it's very typical to see much lower humidity, which is why we're expecting those single digits mostly on this eastern side of the fire. Good news is things will be ramping down very quickly this afternoon. So that core of strong winds aloft moving on east, and that will leave us with a very quick reduction in wind speeds, probably late afternoon and especially by this evening. So returning to that light wind regime after 3 continuous days of very windy conditions. Humidity recoveries tonight, again, not as good as last night because we won't have that little clipper system to our north, but still not as poor as what we've seen previous days, generally 30-40% for most of the fire. As we head into tomorrow, so what we'll see, this is a map of essentially surface pressure. This is just one model forecast. So if you'll notice up here, H for high pressure, this is for basically tomorrow afternoon, looking at high pressure setting up over southern Canada and the northern plains, and then low pressure over here over Mexico. So what that'll do is drive wind from high to low pressure, which is the natural direction that it wants to go. You'll notice kind of the direction of the wind barbs implying that north-south direction. So that's what's really going to push that backdoor front that we've been talking about into northeast New Mexico tomorrow afternoon. That'll make its way southwestward through the day and bring a little bit of a change in wind direction to eastern zones probably by mid to late afternoon. Not expecting that change in wind direction to occur for most of the active fire line until probably midnight or so tomorrow night, and then continuing into the early morning hours. So it is something to watch out for. If you guys remember, about a week ago, we had a similar front move through. That's what kind of pushed these fingers out westward, east of Upper and Lower Colonias. So it's a similar kind of setup. The good news is they have a pretty good tight grip on this west end now. So primary concern is going to be up here in the Pecos Wilderness, where there's still quite a bit of active fire. The good news, though, is that winds don't look especially strong as this front moves through, and they'll be pretty fleeting or temporary, really just overnight period. And then as we get into Wednesday, that high pressure begins to shift further east, and we'll begin to see a shift back to prevailing southwest flow, especially for western areas. Could still see some easterly component out here over the plains and these eastern divisions. But the area of concern is really going to return back to that southwest wind for the most part. So looking on ahead beyond that, looking at overall increase in moisture every day. There's going to be a little bit of an influx of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, especially starting late Wednesday. So first chances for some thunderstorms and precipitation will be late Wednesday night. But probably the best chances, again, like I've been saying the past couple of days for us here on the fire, are going to be Thursday and Friday. It's looking like a similar setup to what we had last week in that we're not expecting widespread wetting rain with it. There could be some thunderstorms that produce kind of small local cores of wetting beneficial rain. But for the most part, they're going to be fairly scattered and localized. Either way, though, we're going to see much improved recoveries overnight and daytime humidity. So regardless of thunderstorm activity, definitely more favorable conditions when it comes to humidity. Temperatures a little bit cooler as well, and overall much lighter winds, not looking at a period of very strong winds over the next few days. So just monitoring for that thunderstorm potential, and then some indications of a warming and drying trend returning by the end of the week. That's about all I have. Again, just one more day of critical fire weather today, and then we're going to transition to a more unsettled and overall more favorable weather pattern. Thanks for joining, and see you again tomorrow.